The first thing that happened from my perspective was actually a phone call from Frank March, who is currently the president. And he was at the university at the time. He was actually Nat Torkington's boss. He was in charge of their IT department. And he, like myself and like others, had realised that there was this domain name system out there. And it wasn't really being run properly at the time. John Postel was still alive and he was running a lot of that from the States. Victoria and Waikato University, mostly Waikato, were the ones who were actually running the New Zealand, the .nz domain name system. It was definitely not core business for university. And of course, Frank realised that at some point the university accountants were going to notice this and say, excuse me. So he and several of us became really quite concerned to actually build something that would take control of this. Because we thought that if we didn't do that, what would probably happen was a large company would stick its hand up, because government wasn't going to be very interested, certainly not the governments of the mid-90s. So we were concerned that a large company, probably Telecom, would stand up and say, oh, that's all part of the telephone system. And of course Telecom at the time was asserting that it owned the New Zealand numbering plan, because it had just been sold off. And in fact, it only dropped that assertion in the last 12 months, that it owned all the phone numbers in New Zealand. So we were really concerned that if they got control of the domain name system, that would actually hamper the growth of the internet in New Zealand. So the real purpose of the society initially was to try and build something that was credible enough and had the base to actually take over control of the domain name system, but run it in a publicly accountable way. And that was quite hard the first couple of years of the society. I mean, we had maybe a year or so of sort of forming the society and getting a council up and running. And then John Hawker, who was one of the original internet pioneers, he said, well, the time has come, and we all agreed. So we wrote off, or John, I think, wrote off on our behalf to John Postel in the States, saying, we'll take this over now. But what happened was we still kept it at Waikato initially, but we had a sort of administrative body in place. But we were all volunteers. Well, we had no money. I mean, we had a few lots of $50 that we were charging people for membership, but there really wasn't anything there. I couldn't sort of afford to all fly together and meet, you know. There came the point where we realised we were going to have to charge for domain names to make an infrastructure that worked. And that caused all kinds of problems. I mean, a lot of people were used to getting domain names for nothing, and they were really grumpy that they had to pay for it. And there was hostile editorial in the National Business Review, I recall, at one stage, accusing us of abusing the internet. And certainly, perhaps the first structure we made didn't prove to be ideal. We built a company which is now called Domains, that was eventually sold off and is now just another domain name registrar. But in those days, I don't think anybody really realised that there was a distinction between a registry and a registrar, as there now is. So for a while, we were running with the company Domains doing all the work, and then the volunteers in the Internet NZ structure, or Internet NZ as it became known as originally the Internet Society of New Zealand.